All right, so for today's class, we are going to be reviewing what we did last week for the Thursday and Friday. So for learning intention, it states, we are learning to combine properties of equality and equivalent expressions in order to write equivalent equations, inequalities, and formulas. For success criteria, it states that I will be successful when I can solve an equation by using the inverse of squares, square roots, absolute values. I'm going to pull up the whiteboard here so we can get started. And I'm going to do just a quick example. So if I have 2 plus x, remember we're focusing on inverses. If I have 2 plus x equals 4, could someone go ahead and tell me, what do I do to find x? Keep in mind, with all of this, all I'm trying to do is find x. What do I do to find x? Yeah, for the people on Zoom, Renee said -2. And whatever you do on one side, you do it on the other side. All right, so then x is equal to 2. This is a quick review. If I have 3x, actually, let's do a different example. Let's make it x over 3 is equal to 4. And the goal is to find x by itself. What do I do to find x? Yes, that's right. For the people that put in the chat, that's good. I see it. So I multiply 3 on both sides, because since the 3 is at the bottom, I have to multiply to get it off the bottom. All right. So it's dividing. So I do the multiplicative inverse. So then x is equal to 12. Now let's jump into what I introduced from last week. So the first one we're going to look at. The first one we're going to look at is solving for x with squares. So the first example that I want to give is if I have x squared is equal to 4, x squared is equal to 4. Remember, the goal is to find x, all right? And I'm not trying to find x squared, so I need it to just be 1x. In order to get rid of the squares, I use the square root sign. So with my previous example, in order to get rid of the +2, I did -2. In order to get rid of the divide 3, I did multiply 3. In order to get rid of squares, I do the square root. And whatever you do on one side, you have to do it to the next side. You see, just like how a +2 cancels a -2, a square root cancels a square. It's the inverse. Yes, this is called a square inverse. So square root of x squared is just x because they cancel out. That cancels that out. And the square root of 4 is 2. If you use your calculators, find the square root on there, you could do square root 4 is 2. All right? The 2 squared, if you want to look at it, 2 squared. Actually, let's go back. We could check our answer with this one. If I have x squared equals 4, and I said x is equal to what? What was x equal to? 2. So then I do 2 squared, which is, you remember 2 squared means 2 times 2, which is 4. Anything squared, that squared means the by itself, that number by itself. So if this was x cubed, cubed meaning 3, then it would be 2 times 2 times 2. So I want to give, actually I'm going to step it up a notch. Let's do this example. I want to see how you would do this. X squared plus 8 is equal to 28. I'm trying to find X. Okay, go ahead.
What I would do is do additive inverse, so negative 8 minus 28, which you get to 20. And then I would do 20 square root of x equals 2, no, squared, and then your answer should come out.
Cool. I don't know if you guys heard Renee very well. I'm also looking in the chat and seeing some responses. Yes, Keely, that is right. Yes, Elijah, that is correct. So we minus 8 on both sides first. So we do the additive inverse. And whatever you do on one side, you do to the next. So then I'm left with x squared equals 20. But I need to find x, not x squared. So I do the square root. And whatever you do to one side, you do to the next side. So this cancels out. So x is equal to the square root of 20. I want you to recognize when you did the square root of 4, you got 2, right? So then that's telling me it's a perfect square. 20 is not a perfect square. So we could leave it as square root 20. Perfect square meaning you're going to get a decimal. With if it's a perfect square, you don't get a decimal. If it's not a perfect square, then you do get some decimal. So this would not be a perfect square. You could leave your answer as square root 20. Anissa, no, use your calculator. Anissa asked if it was 10. Oh, she said, oh, Anissa, it's not 10. The square root of 100 is 10. So then yes. Yeah. So let's go. Let me pick another question from the this question. Go ahead and put in the chat. What would be my first step to solve this one? Multiplicative inverse, that's correct. Which means yes, that is right. So I divide both sides by -2, right? So then n squared is equal to 77. Is it 72? Yeah. And keep in mind, it's positive because a negative divided by a negative is positive. So then, what do I do next? Square root. Yep, that is right, Nicolette. That is right, Keely. So square root, that's right, Renee. Square root of both sides. So n is equal to the square root of 72. 72 is not a perfect square either. If you put 72 in your calculator, let's go ahead and try that. Yeah, you realize you get, where's that button? There's this one other button that you could, there it is. You get 8.48. That is not a perfect square. You could go ahead and put in your answer as n equals 8.48. Right? If you look at the one other thing I want to go over is we cannot find the square root of a negative number. Okay, so I'm going to go over imaginary numbers. We cannot find the square root of a negative number. So if I have on the worksheet, let's look at number 8. 7x squared is equal to -21. So my first step for this one would be divide both sides by 7. So x squared is equal to what? -3, that's correct. And then I'd have to go through and do the square root on both sides. So x is equal to the square root of -3, sorry. What I'm saying is -3 is and it's a negative number. We can't find the square root of a negative number. It's considered to be imaginary. And we will talk about imaginary numbers tomorrow. All right, it's considered to be imaginary. So once it gets to here, just write in imaginary number. All right, we'll just leave it at that for now. So let's look at the other part now where we're solving equations with square roots. So those questions had squares. This one has square roots. Before we do that, I do want to go back to our learning intention so we could look at it. And at first, the first part on there was finding the inverse of squares. Could someone please tell me what the inverse of a square is? What would the inverse of squares be? That's the first part of our success criteria that we just looked at. The square root. So the inverse means the opposite. So you know how the inverse of multiply is divide? The inverse of add is subtract. So yes, let me look at these responses in the chat. Yep, that is right. So the inverse of square is square root. So the next thing we're looking at is questions with square roots. So what is the inverse of square roots? If the inverse of squares is square roots, what is the inverse of square roots? Let me write it so we could see for the people on Zoom as well. The inverse of squares is square roots. Now I'm asking you, what is the inverse of square roots? Talk about absolute. Let's see what the chat. Squares, yes. Nicolette Keeley, yes, squares. The inverse of, do you realize how it goes back and it's like I'm saying, what's the inverse of minus? What's the inverse of add? So it's the same thing I did. The inverse of squares is square roots, so the inverse of square roots is squares.
I said that earlier.
Oh, whoops. Yes, so the inverse of square roots is squares. So if the question has a square root in there, so I'm going to do one quick example. Actually, let me do one from the sheet. X plus 4 all square root is equal to 0. There it is. And the question is that telling me to find x. So first of all, I realized that there is a square root. I need to get rid of that square root. So we talked about it. What is the inverse of square root? So it means I need to square this right here to get rid of it. And whatever, wait, hold on. Whatever I do on one side, got to do it to the other side. All right. So then x plus 4. Remember these cancel. So there's no more square root.
Oh.
It's gone. They cancel each other. Remember, inverses cancel each other. All right. So x plus 4 is equal to 0 squared is what? 0. Because 0 squared means 0 times 0. All right. Yes, Anissa, that's correct. Right. So then now I go right back to this stuff that we learned a couple weeks ago. So what do I do with this question? What would be my next step? Additive inverse. That is correct. So you minus 4 on both sides. And then x is equal to negative 4. That's it. We haven't touched the absolute value side yet. We haven't. We're doing that next. Yes, Aaron. X is equal to -4. Now, ooh, let's look at this question. This one looks fun. 2 is equal to the square root of x divided by 2. Quickly in the chat, please just tell me what the first step to solving this question would be. If you're in here, you could just let me know. People in the chat, go ahead and tell me what my first step would be. I have this question with a square root, and I'm trying to find x, all right? I don't know what they're asking, but I need to find x. Right, get the square root out. That is correct. Other people in the chat, yes, that is right. Some people say square it, squares, get rid of that thing. Yes, that is right. So I do square on both sides because it cancels it out. Don't forget, whatever you do on one side, sure enough, got to do it on the other side. All right, so this cancels out. So I'm left with x over 2. And 2 squared is 4. Nice. I'm going to see who pops up on my screen first right here. Nicolette. So I have 4 equals x over 2. Go ahead and unmute yourself. Let me know what my next step would be. I'm looking for the terminology. What do I call it?
Multiplicative, you know, that one.
Wait, sorry, go again.
Hold on, my dog's being. Okay, hold on. That one word. Dang it, I can't pronounce it right now. Dang it, multiple.
You start laughing in the middle of the word.
I know.
Okay, so what? So it's called a multiplicative inverse. But how
Yes.
do I perform the multiplicative inverse? What do I do?
You multiply by 2
Why am I multiplying?
because you have to do the opposite of the division.
Yes. So x is equal to
8.
x is equal to 8. So if I go back, let's check our answer. If I go back, my original question was 2 equals square root of x over 2, right? And I just found that x is equal to 8. So let's put 8 where x is. 2 is equal to the square root of 8 over 2. 8 over 2 is 4, right? So the square root of 4 is 2. So I know that my answer is right. What do you mean?
Like, when kids and then I thought I was going to click the one and do my
Oh, you did cross multiply?
Yeah.
Yeah, that works too. Let's do one more question. Number 6 says the square root of 2m minus 6 is equal to the square root of 3m minus 14. Elijah, you said to do number 10. If you look at number 6 and number 10, they are very similar. Okay. So you do the same step. So I need to get rid of the square root signs. Let me see who's right here, who pops up. Annalise, you popped up. How do I get rid of the square root signs? Please go ahead and unmute yourself and just say it out loud for us all to hear. Okay, so how do you go ahead? How do I, I'm gonna let it slide this time, Annalise, but what do I do to get rid of the square root? You could go ahead and just throw it in the chat. I'll see it. Annalise. I see some answers coming in for the chat from other people. Yes, that is correct. Yes. So you square both sides. 2m, so since the squares cancel, 2m minus 6 is equal to 3m minus 14. And then I have to get all the m's on one side and everything else on the other side. Remember that part? What's that? I don't know yet. Let's see. So I'm gonna minus 3m on this side. Whatever you do to one side, gotta do on the other side. Minus m minus 6 is equal to 0 minus 14. So now I'm gonna add 6 to both sides. So negative m is equal to, what would that be? 8. And then now I have to divide by negative 1 because this is a negative m, but I want positive m. So I have to divide by negative 1. I'm going to move this up here so we can see it better.
You don't have to put the negative in or...
Oh, it's negative 8? Yes. Yep. Thank you, Renee. And then minus 8. And now I divide my negative 1. So m is equal to positive 8. And that's how you do that one. I'll give us a second so we could jot this down. We'll work one more problem. I said this was going to be the last one, but let's do one more. And then we will go to the other part. Elijah said that he tries to keep the variable positive. And I agree with that. It is a lot easier when we're dealing with positive variables. All right, so we're going to do one more question with square roots. Because why not? So if I do square root of x plus 4 minus 3 is equal to what number should I pick? Equals to 17. So square root of x plus 4 minus 3 equals 17. I'm curious because this one is different. How would you work this one? Actually, I'll give you a quick 1 minute to solve this, and then we'll go back and look. All right, so I'm gonna look at Renee's work right here. Okay. So, okay, and I'm seeing some responses in the chat. My first step, what would my first step be right here? What's that? Plus 3. I'll get rid of that plus 3 first. If there's an additive inverse in there, just get it going. All right, so then my square root of x plus 4 is equal to 20. Now I have to get rid of the square root. Whatever you do to one side, you do it to the next. So x plus 4 is equal to, let's figure out what 20 squared is. What is 20 squared? 400. 20 squared is 400. Now I have to do the additive inverse again. Plus 4. Oh, Mr. McKnight, slow down. Be minus 4 on both sides. So then x is equal to 396. I'm gonna let this stay up for a second so we could see and follow the procedures. Write down all these different in-between steps so that when you're going over it, you could see what we did. All right, the last thing, actually, we're just gonna leave that last part for tomorrow. But we'll go ahead and we'll do those 2 worksheets. If you haven't finished them, go ahead and do them. If you have, then perfect. I'll be going through it. I just want to go back and look at our success criteria in here. So we talked about our learning intention was focused on solving equations and finding the x values, figuring out the formulas, but then also just using the inverse. We talked about the squares and the square root. Tomorrow, we will look at the absolute values. In the chat, I'm going to give us 3 options. I want you to either explain to me, do you feel like you are a red? Do you remember what a red is in terms of if you know the stuff? Tell me if you're a red. Tell me if you're a yellow, meaning, oh, you're getting there. If you're what was other green, which means you're good to go, but you probably won't be able to explain it to someone else. Or if you're a blue, meaning you get it, you could do this in your sleep. Go ahead and send me in the chat. People in here, Renee, could you just let me know how you feel about solving these? Someone said red. Okay, thank you for responding. Yellow, yellow. Okay, yellow and green. Yellow, red, yellow, green, yellow, greenish. Okay. Cool. We'll get some more practice on this. Annalise, I'm waiting for your response. This chat thing will be saved, so I could always go back and look on here. Okay, cool. And Aaron, red is like absolute, I don't get it. Okay. Blue is like, I get it, and I could probably teach someone else. Cool. All right, well, thank you for, okay. Thank you, Annalise. We will do some more questions on this. Remember, let me go back and share this right here so that you know it's on the sheet. I already put in the video, so you could always go back and rewatch those. All right. And then tomorrow I'll put in another video for what we'll be doing. You'll have access to this video as well. You could always go back, and the great thing about recordings, you could pause, rewind, and so forth. But yeah, does anyone have any questions before we head out? Cool. Yes. Yeah, I'll go check the assignments now. If you've turned them in, then I probably got it. I'll look at it, and of course, you know, there's something, I'll share it back. We have to go back and resubmit. Cool. All right, well, enjoy your rest of the day. I'll see you tomorrow. And tomorrow we'll go over absolute value, so be prepared for that. And we'll do some more questions in regards to what we did today. Yes, Renee?
You said that you don't have to, and you said it's not perfect. Where something you don't have to put it.
Right, that is correct. That's a good point. Before we go, Renee, remember I said if it's not a perfect square, You could just leave it in the square root sign. Perfect square meaning there's no decimal point. You could just always go leave it as a square root sign. And we'll just call it B. That's like the exact answer. All right. I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you for tuning in. We're leaving.
Announcements. This will be the last week for football, volleyball, and cross-country practice, and we will be practicing. Also, on your way home, just another